Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, December 9th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, President Donald Trump is heading to Monroe County, Pennsylvania today. It's a swing district in eastern PA. And this is the start of Trump's so-called affordability tour. It's aimed at retaining the GOP majority in the House next year's midterms. And as part of that effort, the president also announced yesterday a $12 billion bailout for American farmers. So here's the president talking about that at the White House. And we'll also hear Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer's response.
What we're doing is we're taking a relatively small portion of that, and we're going to be giving and providing it to the farmers in economic assistance. And we love our farmers, and as you know, the farmers like me because based on voting trends, you could call it voting trends or anything else, but they're great people. They're the backbone of our country.
Let's be very clear. The reason farmers need relief at all is largely because Donald Trump betrayed them and decimated their businesses with his disastrous tariffs. Now Donald Trump's patting himself on the back, acting like a hero to farmers, while using taxpayer dollars to clean up the mess he created. It's textbook Donald Trump incompetence.
So tough words from Schumer there. But Tom, is he right? Is the problem that farmers face now, and maybe the rest of us for that matter, is it all because of the tariffs and our prices are going up? Is that been caused by the Trump administration?
Look, I think Chuck Schumer has a point. That
tariffs are a tax.
Tariffs, yeah, I think tariffs are, and the fact that
tariffs
China,
are inflationary. I just see if Tom agrees.
No. Look, with China in particular, they when we escalated our trade war with them, they stopped buying soybeans, and it was a problem. And I think so. Trump is, and there was definitely some pain being felt by farmers, and I think his administration was hearing about it, and so he wanted to do something. So it is a bit of a bailout or give back or refund or whatever you want to call it. And now that doesn't, even though Chuck Schumer has a point, that doesn't mean that farmers are suddenly going to vote for Democrats. I don't know that Democrats have a plan to win over the sort of heartland of the country and rural counties. I mean, when you look at the results, I mean, there's a gender gap, there's an age divide, but one of the biggest divides that we have in our politics right now is urban versus rural. And urban is all voting Democrat, rural is voting heavily Republican, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon, despite whatever pain farmers might be feeling. I think they're going to stick with Trump and stick with Republicans.
Well, I suppose they're feeling less pain today than they were 24
About
hours ago.
$12 billion less pain.
Yeah, exactly. Carl, what do you think?
Well, I don't mean to quibble with Senator Schumer, but for him to say that, you can argue that Trump's fixing a problem he created. I get that logic. But to say that he's doing it at taxpayers' expense, this money, the $12 billion that the president said he's going to spread out to farmers and agricultural companies comes from the tariffs. So the taxpayers aren't really, that's disingenuous. And, but look, this president seems to careen from one thing to another on his tariffs and trade policy. I just don't. He's congratulating. He was praising President Xi of China for allowing China to buy soybeans again, but they had stopped doing that. They had not stopped, but they had curbed their purchase of soybeans because of the trade war. So you wonder what would have happened if we had no president at all. I wasn't going to say if so, and things were just the way they were. Would it have been better? In other words, I don't mean to sound like a libertarian here, but maybe government's the problem, not the solution.
Well, it does seem like he's taking money out of one pocket of the farmers, then putting it back in their pocket and taking credit for that, Tom. It does.
That's what Schumer said. That's a point, right?
There's a point to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's yes, he has a point, but but again, I don't know that this is going to provide Democrats any sort of political advantage,
right?
Knocking Trump over this. I mean, again,
yeah.
I think Donald Trump is, and the Republicans are are still viewed favorably and positively by most farmers and most rural Americans.
Does let's talk about Pennsylvania. I mean, swing district he's going to. Tom, what do you think the White House has sort of gotten the message that this is an important issue and he's got to talk about this kind of stuff?
Wait, it's a hoax. I thought it was a hoax. Wait a minute.
Well, yeah.
What did I miss, Tom?
So two things. One is, and I talked about this the other day. Trump needs to get back to having welders and workers in the White House. So he finally launches this affordability tour. He goes to Pennsylvania. Okay, so far so good. Does he go to a labor hall? Does he go to a factory floor? Does he go to a construction site or anything? No, he goes to a casino. A casino.
Gambling is a growth industry, Tom.
It's not the best metaphor when you want to talk about the economy. I mean, so I think they got that part wrong. And the other part of this is we'll see. I mean, we'll see. It's one thing if Donald Trump goes on this tour and says, hey, I understand affordability is still a problem. Biden created it. I'm fixing it. I'm working hard every day. Here's what I'm doing. Here are the things. If he just goes out there and says, affordability is a hoax by the Democrats and the economy is the hottest and best it's ever been in the entire world. And, that's not going to do anything. He's going to be seen as basically disconnected. He's going to be seen as gaslighting people because he'll be waving away their problems. And so I don't know what Trump's going to do. We'll have to see. I have a feeling that he's going to do maybe more of the latter and not enough of the former. And that will make this affordability tour maybe not as effective as it otherwise could be.
Yeah. I couldn't resist. I had to go to the Mount Airy Casino website to check it out. Just so you know what we're getting into here. They have 70 table games, 1,700 slots, and they promise this. They promise, and this is a quote from their site, you can be sure to get your adrenaline pumping and your heart racing every time you visit.
Let's take a step back, though. We're talking about Trump's what ought to be his message. And, Tom wants to fine tune it, but it's a hard thing to keep the Donald on script. But does this matter anyway? There's a political scientist from Texas A&M named George C. Edwards III. And George, I knew him well when I covered the White House. He wrote a book about the sort of documenting the very limited ability of presidents to change public opinion through the bully pulpit, that it's always been overrated. And I submit to you that whatever the president says, I think what if swing voters, let's talk about that. Because Democrats, you ask them in a poll, is Trump doing anything right? No. Is the economy suck? Yes. But we're talking about swing voters. And for these people to change their minds about Trump's stewardship of the economy, I submit to you, the economy just has to get better. Inflation has to come down even more. Wages have to rise.
That's so simple. You can't really believe that it's just, you mean the actual economic performance is what's going to make up people's mind? Oh my God.
That's my.
You just put about half of Washington out of business.
Well, that was George Edwards' view, and I wrote about it at the time, and I think he's a political scientist. He makes a compelling case. It doesn't mean and nothing a president does matters. And these other things where presidents do things like Donald Trump tearing down the East Wing and wanting to build a ballroom, people get sort of impressions that he's not on the job. He's not on the ball.
Can I hold on, Carl, just a second? Because look, obviously economics on the ground matter. What people are paying, at the grocery store and the gas station and all of that. And if their wages are rising and they feel good about things, that's ultimately the end. But I will say, there is, and maybe it's a little different because Trump's an incumbent, so it's going to be a referendum on him. But there are these questions, and these sort of intangible questions that pollsters ask people, and they do matter. Like, do you think he's a strong leader? Do you think this? And one of those questions is, does he care about people like me? Right? That empathy question. And if that question is in the negative heavily, that is going to be a weight on Donald Trump. Now, if he can, through his rhetoric, impart some of that empathy and say, listen, I know it's tough out there. I'm working on it, guys. Just, bear with me, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And that could make a difference in some of those. The people feel like Donald Trump understands and is connecting with them and their problems. That's not insignificant.
I don't disagree with that,
Yeah.
Andy.
Well, so here's what gets me. So there is this Fox poll came out last month. 76% of voters have a negative view of the economy. That's according to this Fox poll. I kind of believe that. And then, I mean, you have, and this happened in the last administration, the administration arguing, yes, but. And Larry Kudlow has a piece today. It's on the front page of RCP where he talks about how the economy is doing pretty well in his view. And he says Black Friday sales hit a record, $11.8 billion. Initial unemployment claims are down. Gas prices are down. Construction is up 9.1% over last year. So he's pointing to these facts. I don't doubt Larry's statistics. But that doesn't seem to cut through. And I guess that must be frustrating if you're in the White House because you are hearing about these numbers that sound good and the people just don't get it. That happened in the last administration and it seems to be happening this time as well. But what explains the disconnect between the numbers that the White House, every White House trots out, and people's perceptions of their own lived experience, as we call it?
I'd be curious what Tom thinks, but let me add one caveat to what you said, Andy, because I think the country's become so polarized. We're polarized anyway. Donald Trump's a polarizing person in addition to the general polarizations out there. And people know how polls are used. And I submit to you that you ask a question like that, 9 out of 10 Democrats, I'd have to see the crosstabs for the poll you're talking about, they know this would hurt Trump. They know Trump's in steward of the economy. They'd just say, yeah, the economy sucks because Trump's in the White House. So I wonder if 76% is the real number of how people feel about the economy. So that would be my one caveat to what you said. But
well, I'll ask Tom, but let me just respond to that because these are linear polls, though. That's the other thing. So if that were true, they would sort of stay the same. People would just always say what they think would hurt Trump in office. But the numbers have changed. They've changed for independents and they've changed for Republicans as well. So that's why I always look at sort of polls that are done linearly, and you can figure out over time how the answers have changed. Tom?
What was the original question? No, I think, look,
what's the disconnect? But
look, I've looked at this and over time, and I really do think that there was a sort of a fundamental rupture. This is something that Trump dealt with, Biden dealt with, even Obama dealt with to a certain degree. The Great Recession of 2008, which really, I think, really rended the fabric of our country, economically, some would say spiritually. I mean, it really did alter things. And all of those numbers, right? When people try to, unemployment's low, it's 3 or 4%. That used to matter. People used to ingest that information. It would make a difference. It no longer did. Stock market's rising. Like, that stuff doesn't matter when you're out of work or you're under work, right? You don't have enough work, or you're working 2 jobs, or family members who were put out of work, who lost their homes, got foreclosed on. And so there was this rupture, and I don't think it's ever been fully repaired. And I think that's part of what people are still dealing with. These numbers that politicians cite. Biden used to cite the best numbers. And it's obviously, as a politician, you're gonna take the data that you have that will put the best spin on the situation. The problem is when you do that, and when Trump is doing it now, it is at odds with what people are living in their day-to-day lives. And we talked about how much it costs just to go out to eat, right? Take your family out and for burgers or whatever. And so Trump can cite all the numbers he wants, but there's a fundamental reality on the ground that people are dealing with, and it does not match any sort of rosy statistic about unemployment or the stock market or anything else.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question about this real quick, Andy? Just both of you, I'd be curious what you think. When Trump comes into office, he has these higher job approval ratings in the first months than he ever had before when he was president the first time. And that's what Tom's talking about. And what you're talking about, Andy, he had these higher numbers in the economy. Then he spends the next 10 months boasting about how much he deserves a Nobel Prize, how he ended 8 wars, how he knocks down the east wing of the White House and trying to build a huge ballroom. And I wonder, did people look at this and say, this is not why I elected him. He's not doing what he said he was going to do. He doesn't really, to your question, Tom, he doesn't really care about me. He cares about himself. Is that a problem?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what I was talking about yesterday, and have been talking. In his first administration, he had all these, labor skates and truck drivers and welders, and he did all these events, and those have been largely absent. I mean, he had CEOs in. Remember, he had Tim Cook in before, and all these folks, and got all the tech titans together, and he was really sort of pushing all the different levers and buttons in the economy. And now he's been preoccupied with other things, to the detriment of the U.S. economy. And when he talks about it in great, we're doing this and everything's great. We're the hottest economy in the world. But he hasn't done those things, those events. He hasn't had the communications with the kinds of people that,
But you avoided my question about the ballroom. Andy?
The ballroom, the Kennedy Center. I mean, we just talked FIFA. I mean, these are all sort of shiny objects that Trump loves to talk about, but they don't have anything to do when the average, consumer out there or voter out there looks at that and is like, well, what does that have to do with, I just paid $7 for a half gallon of apple juice at the grocery store. Like what,
Yeah. I'd say this. I mean, there's a pattern that in the second term, presidents tend to spend more time overseas. They're sort of legacy building, and they're, it's nice to be the president to go overseas. You get treated really well, and you get bashed here when you're home. I don't know if that's the case with Trump, because this is such a strange second term, the way it came about. But
especially when he's bashing Europeans like he just did in this interview.
Yes, where he can go overseas now and be welcome is kind of interesting, but they do welcome him nonetheless. He bashes them, but they still know he's Donald Trump, and he is the most important person in Europe, according to one recent poll I saw. So I think that is part of it, but it doesn't explain the whole thing. I do think that this sort of underlying the cost of healthcare and the cost of housing, these two large, sort of secular trends over the last 20 years.
Don't forget tuition, college tuition.
College tuition would be the third. I don't think about that so much.
Forgive me for that being on the brain. I've got a few.
I tell you, once my kids graduated, I stopped paying attention to those stories.
Tom's years away from
yes.
But I think that those two factors, I think that, if the price of eggs comes down, that's great. But if people are seeing that their Obamacare bill is going to double, that kind of trumps everything.
Well, it's not just Obamacare is only 20 million people out of, it gets, that's not an insignificant number, but the vast majority of people get their health care through their private insurers, right? Through their employers. I'm sorry.
I think it's 36 million are in Obamacare now, but
okay,
that it's a lot. And if you're not,
does that count the 12 million people that the Republicans say were signed up for it and aren't really on it?
Yeah,
right.
That's
all the fraud.
Yeah, right. Anyway, well, guys, hey, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom, but don't go away because Sean Trende is going to be with us in the next block. We'll talk about redistricting and the Supreme Court. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. We're joined in this block by Sean Trende. He is our senior elections analyst. Sean, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be here.
So I wanted to talk about redistricting wars and the Supreme Court, but Tom wants to talk about Jasmine Crockett.
I can't resist. We got to get Sean's opinion on Jasmine Crockett's big announcement yesterday. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, here we go.
It was different.
Did you run to Polymarket and put money on her?
Oh yeah. I took out a HELOC on the house and just put it all down. I mean, look, she might win the Democratic primary. I mean,
well, let's just lay it out for our listeners and viewers. She announced yesterday that she was going to run for the Senate in the state of Texas. So
after Colin Allred dropped out, he'd run before. Right. He was trailing in the polls. But Sean, what about Tallarico, the other guy who's in this race who might pose a bit of a challenge to her?
Yeah, I mean, Tallarico he's an interesting guy. He's openly Christian, which like Christian, not kind of just fluffy Christian.
Like Tim Tebow Christian?
Sort of, but he isn't. I mean, he obviously isn't a like fire breathing Jerry Falwell type, but he's he's sincere, which is in Texas would seem to be a good look for a Democrat. He is, however, very, very, very liberal. And so he's kind of got, I think, a lot of white progressives sometimes, just like I think conservatives have bad ideas on how to talk to minority Democrats and such, because they don't have a lot of familiarity in day-to-day life often. I think a lot of white liberals get this idea of, oh, this is how we're going to finally get through to Christian conservatives and bring them over. We're going to run someone who's Christian, but has kind of the standard, fair, Democratic platform, but can talk about it in Christian terms. And so, I think he's an interesting guy. He doesn't run particularly well in his districts. He doesn't run poorly. He's just kind of generic Democrat. But in Texas, you need more than that. So he might be a headache in the primary, but in the general election, I think he has problems. Maybe not as much as Crockett would have, but problems.
Well, so I got to ask you about the other side of this equation, which is the Paxton-Cornyn race. And by the way, Wes Hunt's getting 20% of the vote here, and if he drops out, how might that impact this race?
Well, it's an interesting question. The question is Hunt splitting the anti-Cornyn vote, or is he splitting the kind of more establishment vote? He'd probably be the strongest candidate because he sort of has a foot in both camps, which means he sort of probably plays spoiler for both sides. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think maybe he's the break glass candidate. Like if the bottom drops out for Cornyn and he needs to leave, it would turn to Hunt. But he really kind of throws a wrench into both candidates' strategies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the theory is that if Jasmine Crockett can clear the field, she would run sort of in a clean Democratic primary, which would strengthen her hand and save her money, I guess. And meanwhile, the Republicans are going to be in this circular firing squad and would bloody one another up in the primary and be weakened going into the general. Now, whether that's enough for a Democrat to win in Texas, I don't know. But is that at least the theory of the case?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's Texas is like Lucy and the football to Charlie Brown. Like I think every cycle since 2002, there's been some dream ticket that is going to win the governor's race and the Senate race in Texas, and it never comes to pass. Now it
You
almost
mean for the Democrats.
Yeah.
Betomania got to 3%.
Now I was gonna say it almost happened in 2018, and Paxton is a very flawed Republican who could very easily be the nominee. So I can't see. I think if Allred had been the nominee and you ended up with Paxton, this would have been a very live possibility for Democrats. But Jasmine Crockett, Tallarico, after he gets $100 million of ads dumped on his head, I'm less convinced.
All right. Well, let's talk about redistricting, since you're our guru when it comes to that. NPR had this useful chart today. It showed that the GOP leads in the redistricting effort. That's how they put it. Democrats have successfully remade 6 districts in their favor. This is according to NPR. 5 in California, 1 in Utah. GOP has 9, Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio, I believe. But still, there's a lot out there. There are challenges, even to those ones that NPR says have been secured. So help us clear the fog of war here. That's a term we're hearing a lot these days, Sean. What's going on? What do you think the final tally is going to be before the midterms?
It really depends on a lot of things. I mean, we know Virginia is going to try to redistrict. They're going to put a constitutional amendment up probably in April. We don't know if it would gain Democrats 3 or 4 seats, depending how aggressive they want to be. Virginia isn't California. So I don't think it's as much of a given that this constitutional amendment setting aside the current map will pass, but maybe it will. That would come closer to evening the playing field. But you have possibilities for Republicans in Indiana. Florida will probably redistrict. Another 2 or 3 seats in Republicans' favor. Maybe Maryland goes. That's the problem. So you just kind of run out of options for Democrats at that point, because maybe Maryland goes and gives a seat and their Republican-dominated Supreme Court lets it stand. There's a lawsuit in New York to try to make them redraw their lines. But the big kind of unknown is this Calais decision at the Supreme Court, where they're thinking of either striking down or severely limiting the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
If
This
they
is
do,
Louisiana versus Calais, and they've
Right.
heard oral arguments in October, I guess. They'll decide this sometime early next year, right?
well, we don't know. I mean, the major opinions often come down in May or June because they want to write them carefully. It takes a while, but when the cases get held over, they typically are resolved very quickly because the court. This one was originally argued last year. The court decided it wanted more argument on this big question. When that happens, they typically move quickly because they already kind of know what they want to do. They've heard the case and thought about it. So if that comes down in January or February and strikes down the Voting Rights Act outright, kind of the big potential outright, you end up with redistrictings in Louisiana, in Alabama, probably Mississippi, probably Georgia, maybe South Carolina. You start adding up another 6 or 7 seats, and you talk about Republicans netting probably 12 seats when all's said and done. If Donald Trump's job approval is still in the 40s, I don't think it matters. I think Democrats still take the House.
Well, John, that's what I wanted to ask you about. How many when this is done, how many true swing districts are even going to be left in the House?
Well, that's the big issue is that, if both sides kind of do what they're aiming to do, you're talking about a playing field of maybe 10 seats. Now, Democrats only need like 3. So, and with Donald Trump's job approval in the low 40s, that's very doable. But it does make it so that Democrats might have to win the popular vote by 3 or 4 points in order to take the House, which is, not a great Democratic norm, but these redistricting wars have been building for decades. We can talk about which side should get the lower F, but both sides get the F. I mean, Carl probably remembers. I can't think of the congressman from California's name. Phil Burton's contribution to modern art in 1982. This has been a slow burn.
Yeah. There's this group, Fair Fight Action, Democrat aligned group. They're not as sanguine as you are, Sean, about this. They say that if the Louisiana Calais case gets decided, which weakens, as you pointed out, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, this would dismantle, they say, up to 19 majority-minority districts before the midterms, and say that is enough to cement one-party rule of the U.S. House for at least a generation. So they're a little more alarmed about this, Sean.
I mean, but I think they're counting like seats in California. I've seen that statistic, and it just didn't make any sense. Maybe there are a minority. There are a fair number of majority districts in Texas, but Texas has already done its mid-decade redistricting, and it's limited. Like, Texas is no longer a Republican plus 20 state. You pretty much have to have at least a couple of districts there. You pretty much have to have a couple districts in Florida. You pretty much have to have a couple districts in Georgia, unless Republicans really want to dummy-mander themselves and have a gerrymander that backfires. So I think that's a little bit overheated, but you would probably, in a state like, Mississippi, it'd be, fairly easy. That would be litigated, and maybe the litigation would stretch things out so that it didn't get implemented this cycle. But I think 19 is an overstatement.
So, Sean, this Texas decision, the court decided basically that it was clearly for partisan advantage, and as long as you do it for partisan advantage, you're good to go. So it looks like the California. I mean, this is really. Does this mean that it's full go for most of these states? And then the question is, how often are we going to be doing this? How often can these states redistrict? Now that we've done it mid-district, are we going to be doing this every 2 years, every 5 years? Like, what is the future hold?
Yeah, it's really. I mean, that would seem to be the principle that now that every 2 years you can redistrict. It's something that there really does need to be some type of congressional limitation put in place on it. The problem is that won't get done when one side or the other knows that it's benefiting from it. The way you need to do it is say, effective maybe even in the Reapportionment Act, Congress has to pass an act reapportioning the congressional districts. Say, like, these seats can only be reapportioned every 10 years, given absent a court order or something like that. Congress could do that, and I think it would need to do it well ahead of time so that no one really knows who benefits from it. That's the only.
Couldn't the states sue and against that clause?
Well, there's the elections clause in the Constitution. So states get to determine I can't remember the exact verbiage, get to regulate elections, but it's subject to such regulations as Congress can prescribe.
Okay.
So
that Congress would pass constitutional muster, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
All right. Well,
let's do that.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that?
Resolved.
Resolved. Right here. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. We're here with Sean Trende. Let's talk about the Supreme Court a little bit, Sean, since you're here as well. The justices heard these arguments yesterday in Trump versus Slaughter. That's a case. It centers on whether the president can remove certain federal officials that Congress has stipulated can only be fired for cause. The plaintiff is Rebecca Slaughter, who is an FTC commissioner. But this has wide implications for executive power. So what happened, and what do you think it means for the president? Are they happy over at the White House today?
Yeah, it sounded like the justices were pretty sympathetic to the president's or to the executive's argument. This is a long-standing conservative hobby horse, going back to a famous Justice Scalia solo dissent in the 1980s, that is also one of his more persuasive dissents. But the basic argument is that, Article 2 starts with the executive power shall be vested in a president. Again, not the exact verbiage, but something close to it. And the idea there is that, like, if it's an executive privilege, it's the president. And if Congress tries to limit it, they can't, because the Constitution gives all executive power to the president. And so to the extent that Congress is trying to say you can't remove these executive officers, it would seem to be a violation. Now, the trick is, and this is what is going to be like some fancy tap dancing in the opinion. I don't think people really care that much about the FTC. What people really care about is the Fed. Mm-hmm. Because if you can remove for cause or without cause the leaders of the FTC or all the CFPB or whatever, why not the Fed? And if the court allows that, the financial markets will have an absolute meltdown.
Sean, I want to ask you about that, because Brett Kavanaugh, I listened to the oral arguments, and Brett Kavanaugh seemed to be
put it in a different category.
Yeah, he wanted to, like, exempt the Fed. I thought, so can they write an opinion? Can they, in their opinion, if they uphold Trump's desired, can they write an opinion basically saying this does not apply to the Federal Reserve Board?
So there's a famous story with William Brennan where a clerk asked him what can we do here? And he held up his hand with 5 fingers open. And the idea was, we can do anything as long as we have 5 votes. Wow. I think it's hard to come up, like, it will like, liberal law Twitter will explode if they write the opinion that exempts the Fed. But I think they have to, because I don't think it's a terribly principled outcome, but they also don't want to, like, send the country into a depression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the unitary executive theory, right? Which all our listeners and viewers are fascinated by, I'm sure. But basically, it does seem like the argument is that these federal agencies have grown so powerful. And Justice Kavanaugh, he called them a headless fourth branch of the U.S. government. And they should have to answer to somebody, right? I mean, that is part of it. And it seems like it has to be the president, right?
That's the point that John Roberts made, too, which is that, so there's this 1935 decision where the court was trying to curb Franklin Roosevelt's power, but we're way beyond that now. And these agencies, if the president can't remove them, Congress creates the agency, sets up this quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative, I think was the language in the 1935 case, this idea that they're supposed to be independent, but they're not kings. I mean, we had marches about that. No kings, right? So and Congress exerts no oversight over them. So you have these agencies and you have these people in Washington, the only people in Washington other than the Supreme Court, who report to no one. And I think most people think that you don't have to favor I mean, how are you supposed to get accountability? And that's what a couple of those justices you mentioned, Andy, were saying yesterday, right? Which is that's what elections are for. So if they don't like the executive branch, they can replace the executive branch, but you're stuck with a FTC commissioner for life.
Who does the Fed report to, Carl?
Well, that's what I was saying. I'm with Brett Kavanaugh on this and Sean Trende.
No kings except for too late Jerome Powell.
Exactly.
It's another. This whole thing is another example of how like politically motivated decisions yield bad law, because the House actually tried to pass a law. They passed a law saying Andrew Johnson can't. This really goes back to like the Civil War, saying Andrew Johnson can't remove cabinet officials because Johnson was a Democrat and they didn't want him removing the Lincoln cabinet, replacing it with Democrats. And he said, "I'm the president." He was also drunk, so he probably slurred his speech when he said that.
Well, they
Probably
impeached
challenged
him
half
over
of them to half of them to a duel.
Yeah. Well, we could do an Andrew Johnson podcast someday. It's but he tries to. So he says, "I'm going to do it anyway," and they impeach him over it. He nearly gets removed. But it kind of becomes understood that Johnson is right. Right, he's acquitted, and there's a 1920s opinion basically saying Johnson was right. Like the president can remove whoever he wants. Well, you get to the 1930s. And Republicans are terrified of FDR. Like they think he's trying to set himself up as a dictator. And so you end up with this Humphrey's executor decision, which I think is clearly like, okay, we want to make sure there's brakes on FDR with all these new agencies that are being created. And so now we have this entire edifice of executive built on this idea. And I think the court's about to tear most of it down.
Yeah. Sean, we got about a minute left here, and I just want to ask you this. Is the real problem that these agencies are just too powerful? And so the argument over who controls them is kind of secondary. In other words, one side is saying these people have to be independent because they're so powerful, and we need them to be independent of the president, because if you gave the president control of these organizations, he'd be too powerful. And the president is saying, well, they're so powerful, I have to control them. And at the bottom of the whole thing is the fact that the federal government is just too damn big.
Right. We'd be better off without any of these agencies.
That's the question.
Including the Fed.
Yeah, that's something. So Gorsuch suggested something along those lines, that what he thinks really should be done is bring back this idea called the non-delegation doctrine, that there's limits on how much power Congress can give the president, right? Like, and we see it with this tariffs case too, where I mean the president had a straight-faced argument that Congress has basically given him the power to set tariffs wherever he wants. Now, liberals hate this idea, but it's probably the most straightforward way to rein in Trump, is to say all these executive powers that you're exercising, it was wrong to delegate them to you in the first place. You just go enforce the laws and let Congress make them, and that would probably, address the concerns in this case more cleanly than the unitary executive theory.
That ain't gonna happen.
No.
Well, we can hope. Anyway, sounds like we need a blue ribbon commission on this. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We've been talking with Sean Trende, who is our RCP Senior Elections Analyst. Sean, thanks for being with us. Guys, Australia put into effect today a ban on social media accounts for children under the age of 16. This is not all that popular among at least some kids. Some of them are actually suing the government, but at least one U.S. politician thinks this is a good idea, Rahm Emanuel, who said this. He said, quote, "We've got to make a choice when it comes to our adolescents. Who's going to be a kind of moral guiding light? I put my thumb on the scale for adults over algorithms." So, Carl, kind of interesting rhetoric there. What do you make of him embracing this idea?
Well, Rahm, former mayor of Chicago, ambassador, number 3 guy in the House, he seems to be eyeing a presidential run. I think he makes more sense as a vice presidential candidate, and he's talked about. And he seems to be positioning himself sort of in the center of the Democratic Party, which is where he is temperamentally, and temperamentally he can be out there, but it's where he is intellectually. and he's on solid ground here. the groundbreaking research was done by a professor at San Diego State or San Diego named Jean Twenge. She wrote a book about this, and Jonathan Peterson and other people have weighed in. All of the bad things that we associate with younger millennials and Gen Z, the negative feelings about themselves, the suicide, the ideation, the depression, all of these bad sort of outlooks and outcomes start, pretty much the day the iPhone comes online and kids have access to social media. And, there are all kinds of horror stories about bullying and people encouraging people to commit suicide. And those are anecdotal, but the data is in. Since the advent of social media and the instant access to it by minors has been terrible for the mental health of Americans' children, particularly girls. So that's the data. It's correlative, so it's not strictly causation. And people like John Della Volpe, who did some polling for us, he's at the Institute of Politics, does the youth poll. He's very thoughtful. He says there's other things going on, school shootings and this growing up in the shadow of 9/11. There's other factors, but this social media as a whole has been, and these instant, these iPhones, there's a lot of evidence that has been harmful.
But is it a winning political issue if you're trying to become the Democratic nominee? I think that's the question I have.
Well, 16-year-olds can't vote, so he's after their parents' vote, not their votes.
But Tom, there's a few big tech donors out there who might not be too happy with this. I'm thinking of people like Eric Schmidt. I'm thinking of Sandberg. I mean, is this, they're not going to like this.
Well, I mean, okay, that's fine. But look, I think, first of all, about Rahm, I mean, as the Politico story noted, it's a bit ironic that he's going to be releasing his big statement by putting it on video and putting it out on social media. Now, theoretically, if his plan went into effect, no one under 16 would see it. But yeah, look, this is a tough one because I think in general, the evidence points to the fact that social media has been detrimental to kids. And by the way, I would add to that, Carl, one of the, you talk about the sort of like all of the trans contagion stuff that's been going on has been largely fueled by social media as well. Kids, the algorithm starts serving them, all of this content, and they go into these silos and down these rabbit holes, and it has been dangerous. So yeah, I don't.
And also, Tom, you get me thinking. Also, this this virulent anti-Israel stuff that's on TikTok, that proliferates like a virus.
I mean, this is going to be hard to try and get the genie back in the bottle. But we just saw some data the other day from Florida, for example. Ron DeSantis, they started banning cell phones in schools. If you put the cell phones away and you take them away and you put them in lockers, and remember, there was a big outcry by, I think it was Democrats in the state that were saying, you can't do this. But when they did, test scores immediately went up. I mean, it is a distraction, and kids are spending too much time. I've got teenagers in my house now. 2 of the 3 that are left in the house are over 16, so I guess it wouldn't apply to them. But, they do spend a lot of time on their screens. There's brain rot that goes on. And I do think it generally speaking, social media has not been a net positive for society.
Yeah, but isn't the question, so whose responsibility is it to monitor this? And then you have a First Amendment issue as well, I suppose. I mean, you guys are both right. I think the phones have been detrimental to kids' mental health. I'll buy that, along with a lot of other things that have been detrimental to their mental health. But we didn't ban comic books, and they tried that. This is an ongoing, long time discussion about what kids should be able to read and see. And I tend to come down on the side of kids should be able to read and see what they, other than pornography.
What their parents decide.
Right.
Correct.
And it's the parents' role to make the decision.
Look, I know this technology has been, there is a double-edged sword. And I know in our family, the great thing about the phone is that you can have immediate communication with your kids. If you need to call them, if you can track them, you can see what they're doing, and that's been very helpful and reassuring, I think, in a lot of ways. But the flip side to that is that, you give them a phone and you're like, well, you can only use it as a phone. It's a flip phone, or it's a watch. And the next thing you know is like, well, all my friends are on Snapchat. All my friends are on, these different Instagram or whatever. And it becomes tough to manage that. And so, some parents have been, look, don't give their kids any phones at all until they get, some parents are already doing this on their own, but the vast majority of kids, I think, are getting online earlier and earlier, and that is a problem.
To your point, Andy, I hear what you're saying. There is a freedom of expression issue here, but people, when you're 16 in this country, you can't vote, can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy alcohol, you can't buy a gun. There are restrictions that society puts on children and adolescents because they don't think they can, especially with dangerous products. And what Rahm Emanuel is doing, what Australia is doing, and this emerging movement is to say that this thing here, it's potentially a dangerous product, and it's a new way of thinking about it, because before we just thought, it's instant communications. It opens up your mind to the world. You can do research for papers. There's a lot you can do that's benign, but there are these other dark aspects to it.
Yeah. Well, I did see this Quinnipiac poll. 6 in 10 voters want some sort of restriction on use of social media by age. So just to wrap it up, Carl, I mean,
that's different than an outright ban, though.
It is different from an outright ban. That's a good point.
And by the way, kids it'd be like the Lord of the Flies out there if we try to take millions of kids.
That's right.
15-year-olds and 14-year-olds would go nuts. Are you kidding me?
30 seconds, Carl. Rahm Emanuel, this was sort of an excuse to talk about him as well, because I'm fascinated by the guy. You think he's got a shot?
I think there's going to be a candidate emerge from the center lane of the Democratic Party, and I don't know who it's going to be, but Emanuel's got a terrific resume, and he's a committed guy, and he's got ideas, and if he succeeded everything he ever tried in life. So if he puts his mind to it, I wouldn't write him off.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. Thanks. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. That's our program. If you're listening on the podcast apps or on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, send us a comment. I do read them. It's great to hear from you. And if you're listening on the Megyn Kelly channel on Sirius XM, we'll be back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Stick around. She's coming up next. On behalf of Carl, Tom, everyone here at RCP, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.